And we stated last time that there are 5 primary jurisdictions of authority. All authority has a jurisdiction, and with the jurisdiction, there is authority. In other words, authority gives you the right to decide within the scope of that authority. That scope of authority is the jurisdiction. The example I use is a police officer. Augusta County police officer cannot make arrests in Rockingham County. They got to stop at the line or move into an assistance role with Rockingham County. But Rockingham has to be the lead. And if they don't want it happening, they got to stop at the line. That's jurisdiction. And so with these, and we'll see some things that the Founding Fathers talked about. I got just a little bit of a feedback or something. But let's look at the 5 jurisdictions again. Number 1 is individual or self-government. We're responsible for governing ourselves. Number 2 is family government. Number 3 is church government, or you could even just call it faith, because there's different religions. Number 4 is commercial or economic government. And then number 5 is civil government. And if you would, to a large extent, what I have done here in listing them is started with the highest first and went to the lowest. Now, most people look at that and think I went higher. No, I started at the top and went down. That's why in the Bill of Rights, the Founding Fathers said you can't come into somebody's home without a warrant. You can't come into somebody's home without proper cause. No unlawful search and seizure. There has to be a justifiable reason to do that, because your authority does not extend into their home without cause. But you don't hear people talking like that today. But they should. Amen. And so let's go ahead and look at commercial or economic government. Now, this is kind of a growth out of individual or self-government, or even, you could say, even family government. Originally, the overwhelming number of businesses for centuries, for thousands of years, were primarily individual and family businesses. Now, there were, over time, a growth of what we would call today corporations or joint ventures. Now, they did have those back in Jesus' day. You know, it wasn't that they weren't there, it's just they were not as prominent. Today, they are very prominent. Where back in that day, the majority of the money that was made would have been made in individual or family-owned businesses. Today, I was actually just listening to something recently. Today, I think it's over 50% of all the money that's made, like in the United States, is made by branded companies. Like if you take like Kroger, Walmart, those, they, out of all money made, there's a lot more businesses than them. 80% of people are employed by small businesses. But these branded companies actually make, the figures that they were using was about half of all money made, even though there's an overwhelming number of individual and family-owned businesses. But you've got these, they're made up of shareholders. You own a part. You get to vote in the stock meeting if you own enough shares, so forth and so on. And so that's kind of where it came out. Now, in Joshua chapter 9, verses 15 through 19, let's read something here. It says, "So Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live." This is talking about, I just lost their names. there was a group that lied to them. They knew Israel were conquering, and they dressed up in old clothes, got some moldy bread, and went to them and said, "Oh, word of y'all's victories has spread far and wide, and we're here to make sure you don't come as far as us." Well, now, and they said, "Well, we don't know where you at." "Oh, we're a long way. Look at our clothes. Look at our bread." This is a valuable lesson. People will lie. People will lie. And they deceived Joshua and the leaders. They didn't pray about it. They didn't ask for wisdom from God or anything. They actually made a covenant with them that they would never attack them. And they made a covenant with them to let them live. And the rulers of the congregation swore to them. And it happened at the end of 3 days, after they had made a covenant with them, that they heard that they were their neighbors who dwelt near them. Then the children of Israel journeyed and came to their cities on the 3rd day. Now their cities were Gibeon, these other places too. Verse 18. But the children of Israel did not attack them, because the rulers of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord God of Israel, and all the congregation complained against the rulers. Then the rulers said to all the congregation, "We have sworn to them by the Lord God of Israel. Now therefore we cannot touch them." Now, this is what reason I'm using this. This is an example of a corporate, commercial, or economic agreement. It was the nation of Israel with this other nation. It was a body of people with another body of people. There was a group of individuals, if you would. Corporations, shareholders, it's made up of groups of people from that time. And there are rules that when you buy into it, you accept those rules of how it functions, and so forth and so on. See, agreements between individuals or groups of people constitute commercial or economic government. And see, even in our own country, businesses, to a degree, now there's some boundaries to some of this, but this is still true in general. They have the right to decide, if you would, that you've got to wear a mask to go into their store. They can decide that. Now, they couldn't decide because of your color that you can't come in. They can decide that you can't come in if you don't have shoes on. You've seen the signs. You have to have a shirt on, so forth. Businesses have some latitude that the government doesn't dictate those things for them. So there is a jurisdiction where they decide that. Now, again, in more recent times, we're seeing government basically invade every jurisdiction. And let me use this as an example, because sometimes when I've said this, I've had some people kind of look at me funny. Let's take the case where the baker was asked by a homosexual couple to bake a cake, and he refused to do it. Now, the thing that a lot of people, because he ended up winning his case once it got further, but what a lot of people miss on that is, see, legally, he would have been bound to make a cake. What he wouldn't be bound to do is write something on the cake that he disagreed with. See, there's no moral stance, there's no religious stance in baking a cake. But there is when you put words or images on the cake. And at that point, any baker should have the right. I'm not putting those words on there, or I'm not putting on those images on there. But they should have to bake the cake. You go put the images and the words on there yourself if you want to. And that's the balance of the jurisdiction there. But government is pushing into, they're trying to push into the individual, the family, the church, and even in the commercial realms. We see they keep expanding their jurisdiction. They keep expanding their reach. And what should, rule number 6, respect proper authority. Respect the jurisdiction of the individual. With the whole, again, I don't want to get off too far on this, but again, with the whole mask mandate, I said it Sunday morning. CDC has no studies on masks. Why in the world, and I'm just going to reference based on how they're presenting things, if this is the big bad thing that they're talking about, why haven't they made sure a study's been done? Why aren't they engaging in that? And actually, a former director of the CDC said they're not basing their decisions on data. I would like them to base their decisions on data. If they had data that showed us that wearing a mask made a 75% difference, I'd wear it in a heartbeat. I'm not wanting to make anybody else sick. And I'm not wanting to get sick. If it made that difference, I'm fine with it. But actually, I had somebody call me yesterday from they work in another jurisdiction, and they're dealing with some things there, and they were asking some questions. And one of the things I told them, I said, ask them. I said, do this in a professional manner, but it's the Barrington report, correct? I'm just make sure I got. I said, give them the Barrington report and say, here's data. I have data from my position. Now, if you will give me data supporting your position, I'm willing to listen to it. But they don't have data. They'll, somebody's data. Well, it won't hurt. Those things are not data. Those things are not data. And that's not information. But with it, again, civil government's creeping in on it. Legal entities are treated as people by law. See, if you own an LLC, you are yourself, but you also, this LLC is over here, it's an entity all by itself. Has its own tax liabilities, so forth and so on. And the LLC can be sued and you not be touched. It's treated as an entity. And so again, that gives a jurisdiction to it. These organizations have a level of jurisdiction and responsibility. If you can get sued, obviously you have responsibility. And if you have responsibility, then you have jurisdiction. You have authority, you have the means to make some decisions. So I'm not going to deal a lot more with the commercial side of this proper authority. I want to go ahead and go into civil government. And the first reference, the thing we have to understand is God did institute civil government. In Genesis chapter 9, verses 5 through 6, this is after the flood of Noah. It says, surely, God talking to Noah, surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast I will require it, and from the hand of man. And from the hand of every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man. You see, prior to that, when Cain killed Abel, God protected him. He put a mark on him. And nobody was to mess with him. And if you would, there was no government, no human form, and people were largely just living by their own conscience. That's part of the reason, not the only reason, but that's part of the reason that evil became so rampant. There was no consequences. There was no consequences to it. And so after the flood, after cleaning the earth, God says, okay, not doing that anymore. Not that he made a mistake, but he gave man an opportunity. God always gives people opportunities. He'll give you the opportunity to do it right before he steps in. And so he gave man the opportunity to do it right. Humanity failed. Said, all right, we're switching. Human government. If people do wrong, other people can step in and take care of it and put a stop to it, put a halt to it. If somebody kills somebody, then they can kill them for that. If you would, the old eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. God here instituted human or civil government, authorizing even the death penalty. And I'll just throw a little bit out on the death penalty while we're here. When somebody lives 30 years before they actually get the death penalty, that is not a deterrent. If it happened a lot quicker, it would be a deterrent. And from that standpoint, and somebody was talking to me one time, well, you don't know that. And I said, well, I actually don't really have statistics on that, but I will put it this way. The one you execute will not do it again. And most things are repeat offenders. And I said, so at least in that, it will reduce the crime because you're getting rid of the repeat offenders. You know, and I'm not talking about death penalty for jaywalking. You know, but there are things that should be dealt with severely. You know, and so Psalm 2, verses 10 and 11. Now therefore, be wise, O kings. Be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Here God's talking to the leaders of nations, even to judges. Judges make a lot of rulings. Every civil servant is accountable to God for what they do. Because civil government is a stewardship that is accountable to God. You know, God created the positions. Again, a little bit of what we talked about Sunday. Hitler was in a position that God had created. He was the leader of the nation. He will have to stand judgment for how he handled that position. And believe me, I don't think he's going to come out pretty. See, and especially, I've said this before, but I used to think the Bible didn't really deal much with government. Sometimes I'm just amazed at my own ignorance. But after studying some of these things, I began to realize, dear me, especially from Exodus through Malachi, the majority of it's about governments. Particularly Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, even the minor prophets. So much of it is about governments. See, if you go through and you look, particularly in Jeremiah, that's prior to and including the fall of Jerusalem to Nebuchadnezzar. He tells by the word of the Lord that Israel is going to be judged because of their sin, and that Nebuchadnezzar is going to come down and take them. You know, that verse that people love to quote when you understand the whole concept of the passage, where, you know, I know the plans I have for you, to give you a future and a hope. That was given while they were in captivity. It was written to the people that were already in Babylon. And Jeremiah, even by the word of the Lord, told them, said, if you surrender to the king of Babylon, you will live. If you do not, you will be turned over to the sword or to the spear, so forth and so on. But then later, he comes along, and the way I read it for years, until I really began to look at some of these things and study them, then he comes along and talks about the judgment that's going to come on Babylon. And at first glance, it's like, okay, Israel's getting judged. You send these people in here to do this, and now you're getting mad at them and judging them for doing what you had them do? But here's the thing. And see, and I'll give you what to me is an answer for how America has largely functioned in a lot of cases. See, God did not have a problem with them overthrowing Israel because that was an act of judgment. But even though he was given Israel into the hands of the Babylonians, they were still responsible and accountable for how they treated Israel. See, that's one nation, our founding fathers wanting to please God in everything. They actually set up the precedence of making sure. Now, I'm not saying we got a perfect track record, but I could give you an idea of where our bad track record comes from. There is a thread of consistency with all of our bad stories as Americans, that you would be shocked what is the thread of consistency through those bad stories. Now, but with this, when we won World War II, I actually watched a movie that was about some stuff about World War II. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's called Monuments Men. Any of you ever seen it? Raise your hand. Okay, y'all have seen it. Oh, great movie. Great movie. FDR commissioned some guys who were older people, architect, artist, so forth, to go in and capture, get back, and recover things of art, pictures, so forth, because Hitler had stolen millions upon millions of them, and they actually recovered 5 million objects. As the army was marching, they were going in and researching and find out where he hid. Great story. I don't know how true the movie is, but it is based on a true story, and it does give you a little information at the end. But at that, in World War II, we basically went in and helped rebuild Germany. We helped rebuild Japan, because the philosophy basically is if we actually want God to give us victories and to bless us, then we need to understand that we're accountable for how we treat the people we defeated. And that's really the lessons from Jeremiah, some from Ezekiel, about God judging Israel and then judging the people that overthrew them. Because even though they got judged and these were the instruments of it, they were still accountable to God for how they treated those folks. And when God said, no, y'all didn't do that right, so because of that, you're going to get overthrown now. And so that's something we have to understand there. In Romans chapter 13, verse 1, we'll just read that. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. You see, the positions are God's creation. The positions are God's creation. Like we looked at Sunday from Hosea 8, it tells us that every king that's in position, every prince that's in position, every ruler that's in position, he hasn't always set those up. He hadn't always put those in there. Well, he raises up kings, he put down kings. Yeah, he does. And there are some kings and leaders that are put up that God didn't have any part of it. And that's the teaching of Scripture. Now, he'll work in things. Now, do y'all mind if I just throw you a little tidbit? Just this, I don't have this figured out entirely. But I have done some reading and on it. And there's other people that have seen this and wrote on it, but so far I don't have any verification. But, we missed the thing in Romans where God said that I have the ability, if I'm the creator, I have the ability to either use a vessel to honor or to dishonor. And he actually uses the story of Pharaoh. Now, the thing that people miss, and in how they interpret it, they tend to think he made them a vessel of dishonor. That's not what he's saying. Because especially if you go back to Jeremiah, when God sent him down to the potter's house and told him, said, watch what happens. And he got there and he said he was watching the potter, and he said, then the clay was marred in the potter's hands. and he had to start all over. And God told Jeremiah, he said, I can do the same thing with Israel. He said, even though they have sinned, I can still bring them out and do a great thing with them. That's the Eppert paraphrase. He wasn't saying, I marred them for a purpose. That's not what he was saying. God did not harden Pharaoh's heart. Now, a lot of people at that point, well, yeah, he did. The Bible says so. Let me read it to you this way, in a manner of speaking. The Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart because they interacted with each other. If you would, and you've probably heard this analogy, the sun will melt ice and harden clay. It's not any difference in the sun. The difference is in the ice and in the clay. See, Pharaoh got hardened in the presence of the Lord because of what was in him, not because of what was in God. Yes, the Lord hardened his heart, not in a causative sense of I'm going to make him be hardened, but God knew when I start talking with him, he ain't going to like it. And so you know some people that way sometimes. You've probably have to have conversations with people. And you think about how can I have this conversation with them because I know they ain't going to like it. And you can do your very best and they still end up not liking it. It's not because of what's in you, it's because of what's in them. And that's what God was saying, that even if somebody mars themselves, if the vessel is to dishonor, he can still choose to use the dishonored vessel because he still owns the vessel. And see, what God ended up doing with Pharaoh, because when you read through the prophets, I think particularly Isaiah, there's a couple occasions where it references Egypt. And it says, there the Assyrian abused you, or the Assyrian oppressed you. Historically, there are those that believe that the Pharaoh that was on the throne when Moses came was not Egyptian. He was Assyrian. And hence, a Pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph. If you would, came in. Now, I don't know if that was, I don't know. I haven't been able to find any clarity. But there are certain references in Scripture that references Egypt and the Assyrian who oppressed them. And because it did happen at different times that countries would overthrow Egypt and then they would put their own ruler. It's like in the New Testament, in the Gospels, King Herod. King Herod wasn't the real ruler of Israel. He was a puppet under Caesar. And now there they let him stay. He was from the area and so forth. But they put in different people at different times. And at that juncture, to me, this is the part that's amazing. That God, because he said, I'm going to judge the gods of Egypt. So if you would, he worked around and found the guy that was resistant to him and got him into that position so that when Moses came along, he would resist him and we could have a really great movie. Now, it really wasn't for the movie, but think back. That's been over 4,000 years ago. And almost everybody all over the world still knows the story. Because God said, I will glorify myself. And he did that. And the Pharaoh of that time was a dishonorable vessel. But God used his dishonor to bring glory. He didn't decide what he did. He knew what he would do. Foreknowledge. He knew what he would do, got him into that position, and then God glorified himself. And I mean, it's some of the great stories in the Bible in that particular part, outside of the resurrection and so forth. So again, God creates the position. The person in the position is responsible and accountable to God for the decisions and actions. I'll start at the beginning of the sentence. The positions are God's creation, but the decisions and actions are the responsibility of the person in the office. Now, with this, I want to read to you a part of the Declaration of Independence, because our founding fathers, a very high percentage of them, not all of them, but a very high percentage of them, I think there was 55 signers, and I think it was in the 30s out of the 55 that had theology degrees. Even if they weren't a minister, they had a theology degree. They were students of the Bible. A large percentage of them were students of the Bible. And on this, let's read this, because they get into what governments are for. It starts out as the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, and then says, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Again, they weren't just rebelling. They said, we should explain this to people. We're not just moved by emotion. There's cause. There's cause here. And then they start laying it out. We hold these truths to be self-evident. This is cause number one of the reason of separation. There's truths that we hold to be self-evident. And in our relationship with them, they are not recognizing those self-evident truths anymore. Amen. They're not recognizing them. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. One of Thomas Jefferson's quotes from that time period is that no one is born to wear a saddle, and no one is born to wear, what we would call spurs, to ride the one that's wearing the saddle. One's the servant, one's the master. Jefferson said, God didn't have anyone born to that. And we're all created equal. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now get this is the part I really want to focus on. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. The primary purpose of civil government is to secure the rights that God has given to people. If you would, going back to when He instituted it in Genesis 9, when He did that, He said, if someone takes someone's life, then their life can be taken. If they violated that person's right to life, then they forfeit their right. They forfeit. And we're not going, and basically God was saying, we're not going to let them do that to somebody else. If somebody is going to be functioning in a way that is taking people's rights from them, it is now acceptable to have a human form of government that puts a stop to the violation of rights. That was the basic principle behind God establishing human or civil government. That's where everything should start with government, civil government, and that's what they should respect proper authority. Their thing isn't here to see where individual rights should be. They are here to protect individual rights. They should be here to protect family rights. They should be here to protect faith rights. See, it's God said in Deuteronomy 30, I've set before you life and death, blessing and cursing, therefore you choose. God gave people a right to choose. People have the right to worship the wrong God. Civil government should protect the right to worship the wrong God. That's why there should be no establishment of government, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Their jurisdiction is not to determine matters of faith. It's just to make sure everyone's individual and faith rights are protected. That's really what that is for. Government is designed to secure these rights. And I'll read a little bit more past this and we'll stop. Where we go here? That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Deriving it. Again, that's why I said when we started here, individual rights, individual government, individual jurisdiction is actually the higher jurisdiction, because the government derives, the civil government derives its powers from the things above it. That's why we are supposed to have a government of the people and by the people and for the people. Because government down here is really designed to take care of the problems. Let me just say that again. Government, civil government, God instituted to take care of the problems. When people are violating individual rights, family rights, faith rights, corporate rights, when they're violating those, then the government, civil government, was set in to step in and make sure that those rights are protected. See, from that standpoint, let's talk about consumerism here just a little bit. Not really consumerism, but consumers. It is right for the federal government to make sure that there's nothing harmful in our food. I'm telling you, oh, this is good. Okay, is it? And I'm not saying they're doing a good job at that. There's a whole lot of things they're not doing a good job at. But those things are right, because at that point, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I don't know about you, but I don't want to spend my life in the hospital because I ate something wrong, bad. And they should take care of that. That is a proper jurisdiction of doing that, even though it's a boundary for the corporate authority, for the corporate jurisdiction. There's boundaries for that. Creating safe working environments are there. But again, there's a difference between making sure that people don't stand on top of a 15 or 12-foot ladder. That's not safe. There's other things that we could use there, but there's things that aren't safe. Let's take an organization like OSHA. They have a place that there should be some guidelines, there should be rules, that there is safety. Because, I'll get to that in just a second. I'm talking to myself up here. But at the same time, mandating a vaccine that's not been approved, that has no evidence that it actually works. I mean, matter of fact, in all honesty, evidence is coming out now that most of the variants are caused by the vaccine. And I don't know about you, but most of the people that I'm hearing that are getting COVID now are people that had the vaccine. And at that point, okay, and again, you hadn't done any studies on it. Well, don't tell me what to do until you do your job. That's just kind of where I am on that. But there's a difference between you don't know something and you do know something. I know that if people stand on a 12-foot ladder on the very top and do that consistently and are working and doing a lot of stuff, you are at risk. You're at risk, even though I know people who do it. But that's not a safe thing. If you choose to do it, that's one thing. Somebody making you do it is a different thing. Somebody making you do something unsafe is an entirely different thing. You're going to lose your job if you don't do this unsafe thing. No. There should be civil government stepping in and stopping that, which means civil government should be stepping in and stopping any mandates of the vaccine. But they're doing the exact opposite. Again, I'm not going to fuss at anybody for getting the vaccine. Again, we need to practice what we preach. I believe in individual choice. And I'm fine letting everybody make their choice. You do your research, you do your study, you make your call. And I would definitely encourage you to do your research. But as I told them this morning in Bible study, see, part of our problem right now in this country is there are people that, I use the example of the Soviet Union. People wanted free from the Soviet Union because it was oppressive. They wanted freedom. They wanted liberty. Thank God the wall came down, the gospel went in, a lot of good things happened. But with time, it got messy. It created problems. Liberty creates problems. When you let people have liberty, sometimes some of those people are dumb. And as the old statement goes, you can't fix stupid. And when people have liberty, they will do some dumb things. And where a lot of people are in our country, we need to make sure they can't do that dumb thing and hurt themselves. Well, the only way you can do that is take liberty from all of us. And who is to decide what you think might be dumb, I might think is the best thing since sliced bread. And you could be wrong. Now, again, safety things is a little bit different. Those are a little bit, you can get facts and data on safety issues. I like what Brother Hagin said one time. Somebody said something to him, somebody had died, and they were working around electricity at a major company, and there was water on the floor, and I think it might have actually been over top of the mat that had been there. Rather than protect themselves, they just stood there in the water and did some stuff, and let's just say it didn't turn out well. And when they said, well, the Lord took them. And Brother Hagin said, he said, it amazes me that God doesn't take near as many people that follow safety procedures. Doesn't take near as many when they do. And we've got to understand those things. There are safety things that you can and should do. But going back to this, here in the Declaration of Independence, they derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. And at that point, it is the lower one. It has responsibility upward. The responsibility is upward. And it should take care of that responsibility. That's the way our government was formed. Now, can anybody besides me see that it's kind of got inverted? It's got flipped upside down at this point. It's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. Now, with that, again, part of protecting the rights is foreign companies. That would bring the military in. The civil government is responsible for defending us. And we don't see that happening right today either. I mean, to me, it is horrible what is happening in Afghanistan. I just... And the thing that bothers me, I even almost... I talked about it this past Sunday on the radio program. I said, I really don't even like getting into the political aspect of it. Because when you have Americans that were serving their country put into a place that now their life is threatened, politics should not matter. They should just be taken care of. Just flat take care of them. Do what you got to do. And in all honesty, I don't care if you make a parking lot out of the place. Amen. Or a swimming pool, really big one. But the bottom line is, and especially with our military, we should have been able, listen, we're leaving, but you're not coming in here and doing this stuff till we gone. And if you come past a certain spot, get ready to meet Muhammad. But you're not messing with any of our folks or anybody we want to get out. We leaving. And I don't have a problem with us leaving at all. I don't have a bit of problem. But it could have been managed a whole lot better to protect the right to life of Americans and American allies. And that, as far as foreign policy, that to me, I've been actually trying to think, is there anything that I think has been worse? And so far I haven't come up with any. That a worse situation where it was just so messed up. Right now I haven't come up with one. I might still come up with one. I haven't stopped looking at it and thinking about it. But that's terrible. The government, the civil government, is designed for the protection of the people, to secure those rights. We send them over. I mean, obviously, you get in those type of situations, everybody's not going to live. But when you can see something coming, then you need to step up your game, because you know the threat is increasing. So you need to step up your own threat. You know, and I am not responsible. No, I am. My name is Ray Eppert, and I approve what I'm getting ready to say. I'm not running for office. But, I would suggest to some people, don't sue me over this. I'm not telling you to do it. I'm telling you to consider it. And I'm not just talking to y'all, because I don't know how many of y'all it would actually impact. But there are places, and you would need to make sure of your numbers. But if there are companies, particularly government organizations, that are mandating vaccines, you don't have to quit your job. But if, like if 30, 40% of the people don't want to take the vaccine, then through some kind of secret communication, let's not all show up on such and such a date. Amen. Don't tell me the other side does it all the time. I'm not advocating lying or anything like that. Don't lie about it. Just say, I can't come in today. I don't feel good enough to come in. That's not a lie. I just don't feel good enough to show up. I need to send you a message, and I feel like I need to do that. I don't feel good enough about this. You don't have to tell everything. But see, a number of places, they need to feel the heat. See, I told you I've been reading Saul Alinsky. He was the orchestrator of a whole lot of stuff. Not good. What they did. So you don't want to do anything illegal. Because see, if you do something illegal, you can get arrested. Let me give you one that he pulled. I'll give you two. Well, one he pulled, the other, they just threatened to do it. It was, and the government heard about the threat, and they caved. I'm not saying that'll work in this case, but I'll tell you that one later, because it's very humorous in some ways. very nasty in other ways. But not anyway, just wait. But the first one, there was this company that wasn't responding to their demands, a group of people that were wanting things changed. So what they decided to do, they pulled together and said, all right, let's all of us target this one store. We will go in at this one store at such and such a time, take turns, go up, engage every clerk in the store. Engage them, talk to them, ask tons of questions about the product. Is there anything illegal about asking a clerk questions about the product? No. And they said, go ahead and buy a product. And then the next one be ready that as soon as they finish, they engage. Some of this is called being wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. Do y'all know what a serpent is? It's a snake. A lot of Christians don't want to function that way. But what did Jesus say? He said, be wise as a serpent, but harmless. But harmless. And so in this, and I'm not saying to do this exactly, I'm just giving this as an example, that they went in there and they kept that business tied up for hours with one after the other coming in, lots of questions. And then when they finished, when the clerk finished with everybody that was targeting them, then the first person comes back in and returns their product. And then one after another all came in to return the product. And basically, for lack of a better phrase, that company made absolutely nothing that day and had a huge cost. Now, at that point, I don't think that should be done because, again, you're hurting people with some of that. But again, what we have to understand, if we're going to make an impact, we have to consolidate efforts. As long as we are individuals, for lack of a better phrase, they can pick us off. And teachers don't get the right raise, we're going on strike, not showing up. Schools have to close. Now, one person can't do that, but if you've got a substantial enough group, you're going to have to listen to us or you're going to have problems. You're not just going to arbitrarily dictate everything to us and us just go, oh yes. You're going to have to work with us if you want this to go right. And there are times, for lack of a better phrase, that you have to flex your muscles. Yes. Amen. What's the thing that we learn from the playground? Bullies do not like to have people stand up to them. And that's usually when they will back down. The bottom line is we've got to pick some safe, legal ways, emphasis on legal, safe, legal ways to exercise some muscle. And with that, there would have to be people in different companies, organizations, whatever. They're going to have to talk amongst themselves and come up with a plan. Anybody remember the Boston Tea Party? Isn't that kind of this deal? Amen. Only I wouldn't recommend getting rid of the tea. That is something bad. That would be illegal. But it's still the same process. We've got to understand we can't just sit back and pray. There has to be action. There has to be collective action. There has to be, if you would, to use a term from Poland, there has to be solidarity. I don't know if y'all remember all of that back in the day. But that has to be a part of it, so that they do remember you gain your powers from the powers of the people. And We don't have to go march. We don't have to go protest to shut you down. We don't have to destroy anything to shut you down. But if you mess with us, as the old saying goes, you mess with the bull, you get the horns. And again, you have to use wisdom in this, because I'm not encouraging anybody to do anything that would put their jobs at risk. But there's nothing illegal about calling in for a mental health day. But if 30-40% of an organization called in for a mental health day, they get a message. And there's a lot that cannot be done if that many people show up. And so, in other words, you can't just, because what is happening with Christians, because we have been harmless as doves. We've only done half the verse. We've not been wise as serpents. We've been harmless as doves. Oh, well, they told me I got to. Oh, I guess I have to. Well, and again, if you by yourself, you probably got to. Jesus said one time, Jesus taught a lot of practical stuff. He said, when you're getting ready to do a project, count the cost. If you're going to build a tower, you count the cost. If you're going to take a stand, you do need to count the cost. And if it's just you against the whole thing, count the cost. And you might want to say, well, I guess this is not, a gentleman I was in a meeting with, he was teaching, and he was teaching on church growth. And he was from Texas. And he got there, he said, oh man, he said, I love Texas. He said, I'm from Texas. And he said, we got the Alamo. We got that phrase, remember the Alamo. If anything gets going, remember the Alamo. He said, remember everybody died. And he said, in this, he said, now that's a battle cry. He said, it's about taking a stand. And he said, there are things that we need to take a stand on. He said, is it Jesus is the Son of God? I'm standing and I'm not moving. Do what you want. I'm not moving. Jesus is the Son of God. He's my Lord and Savior. I am not changing. He said, but there's other times you've got to realize, this ain't where I want to die. And so you got to have that wisdom in there that, if you're the only one in the place of 100, that's probably not where to make your Alamo. That's not worth going down over. You might want to take some things. But where there is a 3-strand cord cannot be broken. See, that's what that was about. When you put things together, that's strong. That's strong. Haven't we had wonderful fellowship? A 3-stranded cord can't be easily broken. It's talking about being broken. See, let me put it this way. We will be broken unless we stand together. As Ben Franklin said, we must all hang together, or surely we shall all hang separately. And if you would, they will do what they can to push us. I mean, there is so much more now about, every day you read something, and they're not backing up because of the resistance. It's almost like they're amping it up because of the resistance. And the bottom line is we're going to have to understand that we've got to consolidate our efforts. I'm way off the outline. But we've got to consolidate our efforts. We have got to be that 3-stranded cord that is not easily broken. And we're going to stand with each other. And one of the things that we've got to understand in standing with each other is one of the worst problems about Christians is they look for people that are perfect. And if you're not perfect, well, we're not going to stand with you because we don't like this part about you. We got to accept everybody that's in our camp, warts and all. Warts and all. I might not like this doctrine. I might not like that doctrine. I don't care. We got to band together. We got to have that unity from that standpoint. And I might think that's the dumbest thing in the world. I might not even like how they conduct themselves. You know, Paul taught that a lot. Well, there's 2 times in the Bible that it addresses that. One is in the book of Jude, where he talks there about how he wants to minister the gospel. But then he basically says, some others do it differently. He says they even hate the staining of the flesh on the, you know. And in other words, they come down really hard if anybody does anything wrong. And so at that point, he's like, that's not how I want to be. But they're still pointing in the right direction. Paul in Philippians 1, he said, people get all upset about this. And again, this is the paraphrase from Philippians 1. He said, some preach Christ out of contention. Some preach him out of strife. He said, some preach him out of gain. He said, nevertheless, I rejoice in that Christ is preached. He was basically saying, if somebody's preaching Christ out of contention, okay, you know, I don't like them getting mad at everybody, you know, because there are preachers like that. They mad at everybody and nobody's right except their bunch. And they preach out of contention. Well, thank God they're at least preaching Christ and some people will get saved in the process. Don't like it, don't agree with it, but at least some people are getting saved. Some people preach it out of strife, you know. And that's too close to the other one. I'll go ahead and some preach it for gain. See, a lot of people, I don't like so-and-so. They're just doing it for money. Paul said, I rejoice in Christ's preach. In other words, Paul said, I don't care why they're doing it. As long as somebody is hearing the message of the gospel and has a chance to get saved, I rejoice. Because I might not agree about all this other stuff that they're into and that they believe and that they do. But if people are having a chance to get born again, yes, I'm good. And the bottom line is see, I did run track. And dear Lord, those track uniforms are thin. There is virtually nothing to a track uniform. Nothing. You know why? Because as Paul said in Hebrews 12:1, if you're going to run the race, you got to lay aside every weight. See, weights are things that would slow you up. And see, right now, getting concerned about how somebody else is dotting the I's and crossing the T's is a weight. It will hurt us. It will hinder us. It will create problems. It will stop us from being effective. Another way to look at it, Saul tried to put his armor on David. David even put it on, but then he said, I can't do this. Can't do this. You know, no, I can't do it like you, but I'll still go fight the battle. For us. And again, that's kind of the mentality that we've got to have in this. But again, you got to weigh it. Do you have enough people that it will make an impact? Now, I told you I'd tell you that second story. This story was in Chicago. I forget what group it was. It was actually with, I think, the city, or I forget what group they were trying to get to change something. So what they decided to do, they'd had meetings and meetings, and then somebody leaked something on purpose. A lot of things get leaked on purpose. If you don't think so, conspiracy theories. Oh, dear Lord. That's why people leak stuff, is there's a conspiracy to do something. They want you to know that so you'll respond to that. And And in this case, Saul Alinsky, what they decided to do was put out information, because he had a track record of having the ability to get people to go do stuff. They put out that they were going to go to O'Hare Airport, and they were going to take enough people to occupy every bathroom in the place, every stall, every urinal. And then they would just stay there. This is what they leaked. So you got people coming off the flight. If you've flown, what's usually the first thing you do? The people in charge realized we cannot have, because O'Hare Airport is a busy airport, even back then it was. We cannot have all of these. He had some colorful names for his program on this one. But they said, we cannot have this happening, because people are going to have to go somewhere. And so they got really nervous about what would happen. And so they caved. They never even planned to do it. They just leaked it that they were. But see, it worked because he had pulled off enough stuff where they actually succeeded in it. They didn't even have to do that. They didn't even put out to people to be prepared for it. They just leaked that that's what the plan was. And they, on some of this stuff, what we've got to understand, again, I had not planned on doing any of this, and I will hit this real quick and we'll close the rest of this. We've got to stand together. We've got to stand together. And we've got to find ways to stand together. And we've got to find ways, when we stand together, that actually cause them to understand. They need to understand they got to deal with us. They can't not deal with us. They can't just go. See, what they have done for years right now is they just put it out, and well, the Christians, they'll throw a fuss and then it'll be gone. But you look at the other side. Oh, we throw a fuss. Oh, they're going to do this. They're going to do that. I'm not a big one for protesting. Protesting is just a lot of loud noise. That's one thing most of those other protests is they destroy property. They don't just want to protest, they want to destroy property, because that makes people feel that there's a problem. Well, that's not being wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. See, that's one thing I've said with the whole Black Lives Matter and all the protests last year with that. I said, those people are not for blacks. You don't say, oh, we're for blacks being treated right, and then go into a black community and destroy their businesses. You're not for them. You're not for them. But news doesn't bring that out, But anyway, let's go on. The purpose of the 5 jurisdictions. The concept of separation of powers is the core antidote to dictatorial power. Separation of powers. God actually instituted that. God actually had it in there. And, like in the early days, let's use the kingdom. You had the king, you had the prophets, you had the priests. And before that, you had the judges, you had the prophets, and you had the priests, and so forth. That stops dictatorial power. That stops the consolidation of power in any one thing. That's why we have executive, legislative, and judicial, is to keep each one. They actually, see, part of the genius of our government is to create gridlock. Because if a substantial number of people are not on board, You can't just push your way through unless you have the White House, the Supreme Court, and the legislative body. Now, if you do that, because see, like right now, Democrats have 50, plus the vice president is the president of the Senate, then at that point, then it carries. You can override a lot of things like that. But it wasn't designed. It was designed to be a balance of powers with checks and balances. And that would stop any person with one idea just overrunning all the other people. That's the purpose of the Electoral College. You have so many people today wanting to get rid of everything that was put in as a check to power. That's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. Out of this concept of separation of powers, the distinction of limited government, and out of this concept comes the distinction of limited government and centralized tyranny. When it all becomes centralized, it becomes tyrannical. I have the power to do this, so I will. With the checks and balances, okay, no, your jurisdiction's limited. You can't go into that area or this area. That's really what limited government is not talking about the size of government. It's not addressing size of government at all. It's talking about the scope of jurisdiction. The government's jurisdiction does not reach to your home. It does not reach to your kids. It does not reach to your faith. It's limited, but it's trying to encroach in all those areas. Tyranny is the usurpation and stealing of appropriate rights from one jurisdiction of government to another. See, if it's your self-government, but then the federal government decides to mandate, or the state government decides to step in and force you on your choice, that's tyranny. Even if, quote, it's good for you. Etymology, the study of how we got words, the very beginning of the word tyranny did not distinguish between whether it was for somebody's good or for somebody's harm. The original word meant you decided to make the choices for them that they were supposed to make. That's the beginning of tyranny. And see, we're being presented with right now that a lot of people are buying into is tyranny based on we're trying to help you. We're trying to do what's good for these people that don't know better. And as I'll quote Ronald Reagan, one of my favorite quotes. I need to count the words. I counted them multiple times. But he said something like the scariest 9 words in the English language, or 7 words, whatever it is. I'm from the government, and I am here to help. That's scary. That's scary. You see, when power is centralized inappropriately into one jurisdiction, here's what manifests. In individuals, it will create anarchy. Now, what I mean by that, see, if prior to the flood, it was centralized in individuals, and there was no accountability, there was no check. So people did what they want. That brought about the need for the flood. Second, family. If it all gets centered in the family, then that ends up creating nepotism. That form of government on a federal level, national level, would be called a monarchy from that standpoint. If it's in the church, if it's in the realm of faith, then it becomes religious tyranny. And the religion requiring the practice of faith from non-believers through civil government. That's what the Inquisition was. The Inquisition was, and even the Crusades were largely built on religious tyranny. That's what they were largely built on. And everybody's supposed to have the opportunity to make their own choice. Then in realm of economics, then it creates fascism. The mobilization of society under one party, under a one-party state, or under the military for economic needs. See, Hitler, he brought Germany, he won an election, but then he brought them in under the military and caused Germany's economics to grow. He was pro-Germany. See, this is the thing that people don't recognize. See, nationalism is not wrong. Now, they'll say, well, what Hitler did was nationalism. It was nationalism on steroids. It is not traditional nationalism. Every ruler should look out for the best interest of their own country. Now, not, again, not take from the jurisdiction of another country, but take care of the people. And when it becomes economically driven, if you would, because it's all about making sure just totally everything is here, we don't care. So matter of fact, we will invade you to take the stuff we need. That's fascism. Because if you would, every communist country that's strongly communist, every socialist country that continues to move down that path and doesn't find a stopping spot, all become aggressive. China hasn't been aggressive for decades, but they kept moving down that path. And now they have declared that the military should be prepared for war, that they should be getting ready for war. Why? Because the bottom line, they don't want to just run their own place. They want to control everything else for their benefit. And so it produces that. And in civil government, if it all gets consolidated there, then it becomes totalitarianism. Permits minimal individual freedom and seeks to subordinate all aspects of life to the authority of the state. Can anybody see that shade coming? That color of life coming to us? Lance Wallnau, I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. If you're not, he's a unique individual. I really like his teaching. I have more trouble with his social media stuff. He's just kind of all over here, but still good. But especially when he focuses and he teaches, most of his social media stuff comes on at midnight or 1 o'clock. But anyway, I was in a service he was doing, and he said there are 7 kingdoms, 7 mountains of authority, spheres of influence. And he said when people do not trust civil government, and he drew a line through it, when people are beginning to rely and they don't trust entertainment. We don't trust entertainment. And he identified a couple things that's very much where we are right now. He said very frequently, and he said this is what happened in Hitler's, even in the financial one, if things are not working financially. See, and one of the things, and man, I have ran my mouth a lot tonight. I'm sorry. But see, one of the things that bothers me, when COVID came out, if you were big business, you could stay in business. If you were small business, you had restrictions put on you that you would have trouble with. And the bottom line, there's been a lot of businesses, mainly the ones that are small, that don't have the ability to weather the storm. Why? Because if you're going to have a totalitarian government, you can't have the majority of your businesses being individually owned. You need large corporations that rules and regulations can impact them to a certain degree that you can actually control them and just deal with them rather than all these other people. And I'm convinced that a lot of what's going on today has been designed to reduce the number of small businesses and hinder them and hurt them. And that's all a part of totalitarianism. So anyway, conclusion, respect proper authority. I apologize. God bless.